The way he left his phone face down on the kitchen counter nagged at me. Never did that before, always tossed it on the island screen up, like he had nothing to hide. But lately, it's always been this new habit, face down, the glow of notifications hidden. Not that I cared much before. Dinner wasn't any better, usually. Mark regales me with tales from the office, juicy gossip about that annoying Karen in HR, you know the type. Tonight it was flat. Answers in single words, his eyes barely met mine. The whole time I felt this distance between us. Like a canyon was opening up on our kitchen table. Then, the late nights started. Big project, gonna be a game changer, was all he'd say, heading for the door. Twice, no, 3 times now, I swore I caught a whiff of something sweet, almost floral, hanging in the air behind him. Perfume, not mine. Sleep was an enemy those nights. My mind raced, was I crazy? Maybe Mark was just stressed, and I was letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I felt it, something was off. Something was changing. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. When he was dead asleep, I crept over, heart pounding. His phone lay on the nightstand, the screen dark. It was stupid, I knew it was. But I reached out, my hands shaking. I unlocked it, fingers flying over the familiar password. Messages. Dozens of them, all work-related, nothing suspicious. Disappointment washed over me, I was an idiot. As I put the phone back, something flickered in the inbox. Just a name, one I didn't recognize. Curiosity burned through me, I clicked it, the messages weren't raunchy, nothing like that. It was just friendly. Way too friendly for coworkers. Jokes, memes, heart emojis. My stomach sank. That night, when he tried to touch me, I turned away, my skin crawling. The passion we had, it was gone. Replaced by a cold, sick feeling deep in my bones. The next day, that damn phone haunted me. I should have just left it alone, moved on. But I couldn't. All I could think about was that name in his inbox. During my lunch break, I found myself scrolling through company directories, searching faces. Nothing. Then, a stupid thought struck me. The other night, Mark mentioned a new steakhouse downtown. Fancy place, supposed to be some big client deal thing. I knew he was lying then, why would he waste company money on lunch? My hands were clammy as I scoured the restaurant's website. There it was. A lunch menu, and tucked away at the bottom, a receipt form. I plugged in yesterday's date. My pulse throbbed in my temples as the receipt popped up. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, definitely not a business meeting. Fear and anger twisted in my gut, making me feel sick. After work, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove downtown and parked a few blocks from his office building. It felt like some bad spy movie, me staking him out on the street. When he finally emerged, he wasn't alone. A woman. Young, ridiculously pretty, all long legs and shiny hair, fell into step beside him. My stomach plummeted. They laughed at something, his hand touched her arm lightly. I watched from my car, a knot of ice in my chest. He opened the passenger door for her, and they drove off, disappearing into the flow of traffic. I forced myself to follow, just far enough to see where they went. Another restaurant, this one small and tucked away on a side street. He's an idiot, I thought bitterly. Doesn't even try to be discreet. I needed to know who she was. Needed proof. Mark and I had a wide social circle, there was bound to be someone who knew something. That's how I found myself at lunch with Sarah, a chatty woman from the neighborhood whose husband worked in the same industry as Mark. It took a few glasses of wine, but finally, Sarah let a name slip, Emily. Little Emily from finance, right? She's a sweetheart, but always thought. Well, maybe Mark sees something in her we all missed. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. I got home that night feeling numb. Emily, of course, it was someone young, someone to make him feel important. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, looking at my reflection. Was I suddenly old? Unappealing? I didn't want to cry, didn't want to fall apart. Instead, a cold determination settled over me. Confronting Mark then would be pointless. He'd deny it, I'd rant, we'd both feel awful, and nothing would change. There had to be another way. The second I confronted Mark, everything changed. He was all apologies, swore it was a meaningless fling, that only I mattered. He even looked a little scared, funny, now that he thought he had something to lose. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the familiar. But Emily's face kept flashing in my mind, her easy laugh, the way she touched his arm. No, this was a game now, and I wasn't going to lose. I forgive you, I told him that night, and meant the opposite of every word. He looked so relieved, the idiot. That's when I knew, I had to get smart. This wasn't about screaming matches, it was about winning. He tried to get back to normal, being attentive, suggesting weekend getaways like he used to. I played along, all smiles and sweet words. But behind the act, I was busy. That misplaced anniversary card reappearing on his desk? That was me, seeing Emily, looking surprised and awkward, at Mark's favorite coffee shop. Also me, subtle things, things he'd brush off as coincidence, but enough to keep him on edge. He never knew what to expect, started looking over his shoulder. Outwardly, my life was the same, dinners with friends, volunteering, the usual. But in my head, it was all fury and careful calculation. Every laugh over cocktails with our old crowd was agony, knowing they saw us as the perfect couple. The anger inside me? It was like this hot, writhing thing, barely contained. Then there was the day at the grocery store. I was lost in thought, lining up a perfect revenge scenario, when suddenly I met his eyes. A stranger, tall, kind face. Something about him, some understanding in his gaze, disarmed me. I felt my cheeks go hot, and looked away as fast as I could. It was just a dumb moment, a blip in my master plan. But that night, it haunted me. Had he seen through my mask of composure? A week later, I found myself at the office of a lawyer friend recommended. Her office was all sharp angles and cold steel, perfect, with a clinical detachment that surprised even me. I laid it all out, the cheating, my plan for retribution. Every word tasted bitter, but also strangely satisfying. The lawyer was impressed, or maybe horrified. Doesn't matter which. She laid out my options, all the ways I could make Mark's world crumble around him. We talked numbers, cold, precise figures representing everything we build together. My mind raced, but my face, I'm sure, was still that same calm mask. Our anniversary was coming up. Perfect. That night I went all out, fancy restaurant reservation, a sappy card, all the things he loved. Meanwhile, I'd rented a tiny, nondescript apartment across town, my temporary HQ. The day of work was a blur. My getaway bag was stashed in my trunk, a burner phone in my pocket. Every time Mark smiled at me, wanting to make up for lost time, I felt a jolt of twisted satisfaction. He was clueless, the fool. After dinner, I pretended a headache. Needed an early night, he kissed me, oblivious. I watched him leave, listened for the front door closing behind him. That was it, the switch flipped. It wasn't my home anymore, just a battlefield I was leaving behind. With practiced efficiency, I went about my tasks. Bank transfers, moving jewelry, important documents, everything I needed to vanish. Then, the letter. It took hours. Not a love letter turned sour, no tear-stained accusations. It was a precise dismantling of everything he thought was true about his life, typed in crisp, emotionless font. Leaving it on his pillow was brutal, but necessary. Then, the hardest part. A carefully plotted errand took me past his favorite wine bar. Sure enough, there they were, Mark and Emily, heads together, laughing. It was so blatant, so careless. I parked across the street, willing myself invisible. He deserved this. A taste of public exposure, a tiny fracture in his perfect deception. I stayed long enough to see her face turn white when she spotted me. Then I walked back to my car and drove away. Hours later, back in the desolate apartment, his calls bombarded my phone. Finally, he left one voicemail, voice thick with fury. What the hell was that? You think you can just... What game are you playing? Game? Almost cute. I deleted the message, turned off the phone, and poured myself a generous glass of wine. It tasted like victory. Sleep, when it came, wasn't peaceful, but it didn't matter. Tomorrow, the real war began. The aftermath happened so fast it was almost comical. The day after I vanished, he bombarded my lawyer friend with frantic calls, trying to find me. Too late, my accounts emptied, investments liquidated, he was left panicking, realizing every bit of financial security he thought he had was gone. Meanwhile, little Emily disappeared. Turns out, a fling is one thing, being tied to a public mess is quite another. She packed her bags, left town, smart girl. Mark was alone, truly alone now. The gossip spread like wildfire. The wife he wronged? Turns out she wasn't as meek as everyone thought. People who were all sugar and smiles to my face before, well, let's just say their tune changed. Dinners, events, those invites dried up overnight. Mark, the golden boy, was suddenly tainted. At work, that big project fell apart. No focus, no trust. I heard through the grapevine he got called on the carpet, then sideline. All those late nights wasted, and for what? Every time I imagined his face, the confusion turning to despair, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Then, he tried to reach out to me. Pathetic messages, begging, to talk, to work things out. Then the threats. My lawyer handled that mess. Each time his ranting got worse, she sent a meticulously written warning, a promise that every action had consequences. That's what broke him, I think, more than the money. Control, he craved it, and now a woman he dismissed had all the power. He spiraled. There were rumors, angry outbursts in public, even a drunken scene at a bar where we used to go. He blamed me for everything, said I destroyed him on purpose. In a way, I suppose I did. The best part? I didn't have to lift a finger for that public meltdown. People love a salacious scandal, and once suspicion got planted, they dug up the rest. Old photos, sightings, whispers turned into outright accusations. His reputation was in tatters. When his lawyer finally served me with divorce papers, my response wasn't rage, or even sadness. It was a settlement proposal so ruthless it probably made the lawyer wince. Bankruptcy wasn't enough. I wasn't just taking what was mine, I was taking everything. Watching Mark completely fall apart was a chilling sort of satisfaction. After the initial fury, I mostly felt nothing much. He wasn't worth my anger anymore, just a pathetic figure I barely recognized. The news filtered back to me in bits and pieces. Turns out alcohol was his new best friend. The meticulous man who only sipped vintage wine was now spotted stumbling out of dive bars in the middle of the day. His appearance went downhill fast. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven, that smug confidence replaced by a hunched posture and haunted eyes. Some people might have pitied him. Not me. Every hollowed-out feature was a testament to his downfall. Worse than his decline was the paranoia that ate away at him. He started seeing enemies everywhere, convinced people were whispering, laughing behind his back. He wasn't wrong. This small, comfortable world we lived in? Turns out, they loved witnessing the mighty fall. The work gossip was the most delicious. Outbursts, missed deadlines, screaming matches with colleagues who suddenly weren't afraid of him anymore. It all built up to the inevitable, him getting fired. That big project of his turned out to be a total disaster, costing the company money. He'd built his entire identity on his career, and now that was gone too. I heard he tried to track down Emily, probably in a drunken haze. Stupid man. By then, she was miles away, some anonymous city, a new life where no one knew her as the homewrecker. Serves him right, being abandoned like that. He needed someone to cling to, someone to blame. I wasn't playing that role anymore. I moved into my new apartment around then. Not some lavish place, but it was mine, chosen on my own terms. Each new piece of furniture, every plant I placed on the windowsill, it felt like a tiny act of rebellion. My prison sentence was over. His, well, that was his own doing. Finalizing the divorce was clinical, a gruesome kind of formality. My lawyer was a shark, and Mark's was reeling from everything else imploding. There weren't tearful negotiations, just acid spreadsheets and cold signatures. I got more than I originally asked for, leaving him scrambling to cover basic living expenses. My final act of revenge? Refusing alimony. Let him work for his own money, for once. Word of the settlement spread fast, another juicy morsel for the gossip mill. I wasn't cruel, not really, but hearing through mutual friends about his humiliation. Well, I won't lie, it felt good. Then came a touch of revenge that was even sweeter. Turns out, Mark had a rival at work, an underling who always got overlooked. I made a few anonymous calls, slipped a bit of information to the right person, and voila. That underling got Mark's old job. Knowing every promotion would feel like a slap in the face to Mark? That made me positively gleeful. With more money than I ever imagined, I did something radical, invested a huge chunk in a startup venture, something risky and thrilling. Not just for profit, but for the feeling of building something, making my own mark instead of being defined by a failed marriage. Life took on this strange rhythm. There were lonely nights, sure, echoes of the past haunting me sometimes. But then I'd see a grocery store display and remember the man from ages ago, the one whose eyes seemed to understand when mine were filled with despair. I decided to track him down. Just coffee, just a conversation. Turned out he remembered me too. Kindness, then, was more powerful than I thought. He became a constant, a quiet source of support, and then, something more. It felt terrifying to trust again, but I was learning that risks could pay off in unexpected ways. The day I moved into my new place, that's when I felt the shift was complete. Spacious, filled with light, chosen entirely by me. Every piece. The plush rugs, artwork that spoke to my soul, a bookshelf I filled with novels I'd always meant to read. It was a declaration of independence. No more hiding, no more compromises. Mark. He was becoming a ghost, a cautionary tale I'd tell myself to never fall victim again. Years went by, not in a blur, but each one deliberately taken and owned. My business investment paid off, that gamble turned into a success story, and I was smart, managing money in a way I never could before. With the new man, David, kind and solid, things progressed slowly. Love took on a whole new meaning, built on trust earned, not promises made. Then, like a pebble tossed into a still pond, news of Mark ripped through my carefully constructed life. Rehan. Turns out, self-pity and cheap whiskey are a dangerous combination. He'd hit rock bottom, lost everything. For one jagged moment, I felt the old rage flare. Part of me wanted him to suffer forever. Then I pictured him, bloated, defeated, a shell of the arrogant man he once was. The image wasn't satisfying, just sad. I toyed with sending a donation to that rehab place, anonymously of course. Make him sweat, wondering where it came from. Then I realized, he wouldn't even connect it to me. My success was invisible to him, because that world, our world, didn't exist anymore. Not caring what happened to him. That felt far more powerful than any petty revenge. News came a year or so later that he'd left Rehan. Nobody knew where he went. Some said another city, others figured he was homeless, living on the streets. His name popped up occasionally, always in whispers laced with disgust or morbid fascination. He was a ghost story now, a warning passed among couples at parties. The invitation to that charity gala landed on my desk a few months later. One of those fancy, black tie events, the kind Mark and I used to attend, all smiles and lies. Should I go, some act of defiance? That felt too dramatic. In the end, I went because the charity supported a cause I actually believed in. I arrived alone, head held high. A dramatic dress, a risky color. I hadn't cared what people thought in a long time, but that night, dressing the part felt good. Heads turned, but not with pity or judgment. There was curiosity, maybe even admiration. I'd become the woman who survived, who came back stronger. That night, I made a sizable donation to the charity, public, in my name. Not some petty dig at Mark, but a way of taking all that pain and transforming it into power. Later, I even danced with David, laughing until tears ran down my face. It felt like a baptism, a letting go of the last bit of anger I held on to. The next day, I established a foundation in my name. It supports women like I was back then, trapped, scared, unsure how to escape. Thinking of everything Mark took from me, and channeling that into something good? Now, that's the ultimate revenge. The wedding was small, beautiful. Just David, a few of my closest friends, a judge by the ocean. Nothing like the extravagant affair Mark and I endured, filled with people I barely knew. This time, every vow felt true, earned through heartbreak and finding the courage to believe in love again. Life settled into a content rhythm. My foundation thrived, real success stories unfolding with every woman who found the strength to leave a toxic life behind. David and I built a comfortable, happy life, quiet evenings, shared passions, the kind of easy companionship I never dreamt possible. Then again, I never used to dream much at all. That was one of Mark's gifts, I suppose, crushing my hope so utterly, that freedom became its own kind of ambition. Sometimes, my mind would still flicker back to him, not with sadness, or even anger, just a cold recognition of all he lost. I knew he was nothing, meant nothing, and that emptiness felt like a victory hard won. The encounter happened out of all places, the supermarket. A woman I vaguely recognized from the old neighborhood approached me, eyes filled with hesitant sympathy. Turns out, even small-town gossip has a long reach. I heard about Mark, she said quietly, such a shame, really. He was always nice enough. The urge to laugh, vicious and loud, bubbled up in my throat. Nice enough? That was a new one. Instead, I managed a small, almost sad smile. Don't be, I replied, the words feeling almost rehearsed. Everything that happened to him, he brought upon himself. A look of startled uncertainty flitted across her face, pity battling with curiosity. Good, let her wonder, let the story twist and morph without ever knowing the truth. I walked away before she could offer another vapid platitude. He wasn't a tragedy, not a victim. Just a man who destroyed himself, piece by piece. I ran into David at the checkout line, his arms loaded with ingredients for some new recipe he was excited about. As we walked out, sunshine warm on my face, he slipped his hand into mine. It was a simple gesture, unremarkable, yet it filled me with a sense of peace that was deeper than joy. My life wasn't about revenge anymore, or proving those old gossips wrong. It was about every day that was mine to shape, a testament to the woman I chose to become. The past was truly a foreign country now, one I didn't regret leaving. My fingers trembled as I turned the screen, squinting to make sense of the words. A photo, him, with her, their bodies a blurry tangle against the backdrop of a hotel room I didn't recognize. Nausea clawed at my throat. No, I choked out, the room spinning. This can't be real, it can't be. This wasn't just some misplaced suspicion. No amount of frantic searching would uncover an innocent explanation here. The truth, ugly and raw, was splayed across his phone. Everything was a lie. The late nights, at work, the sudden weekend business trips, even the way he brushed my hand away when I reached for him. A scream tore from my lungs, guttural and desperate. How could I have been so blind? The signs now seemed so obvious, a grotesque mockery of my supposed insight. I wasn't the perceptive woman I thought myself, the strong partner. I was a fool. A joke played out in stolen texts and cheap hotel rooms. Tears, hot and humiliating, blurred my vision. I slumped onto the bed, his discarded shirt still beside me. It reeked of his cologne, a scent that suddenly poisoned the air. The urge to destroy something, anything, was a living thing within me. But then, the rage subsided, momentarily eclipsed by a bone-deep weariness. Tears dried on my cheeks, leaving behind an icy determination. "You won't get away with this," I whispered aloud, the silence of the house amplifying the vow. Blind fury wouldn't help. I needed a plan. Someone needed to know. My sister, Sarah, her blunt honesty, her fierce loyalty would be the first line of defense in this war no one saw coming. Each shaky step towards my phone felt like defiance. Sarah's voice, panicked at the edge of my broken explanation, was the anchor that stopped me from floating away completely. I was still unraveling, each word she uttered another stitch in the tattered fabric of my reality. The bathroom was cold, the mirror showing a stranger, eyes wild and haunted. That woman had trusted wholeheartedly, had built a life around a foundation of sand. I needed to change, to rebuild, to become something I didn't even recognize yet. As I saw him, briefcase in hand, pecking out a distracted "good morning," I knew a performance was in order. One last act before the curtain fell. His smile was the same. Mine wasn't. If he noticed the slight shift in my eyes, that tiny crack in the facade, he didn't show it. Let him be blind a little longer. The sweet taste of revenge bloomed on my tongue. My turn was coming. Every ring of his phone was a whip crack against my raw nerves. He'd been extra cautious since the discovery, but slip-ups were inevitable. That careless second, the forgotten lock screen, those were my weapons now. Each swipe through his messages, every call log entry meticulously noted, was a piece of the arsenal I was building. Social media became an obsession. Her face, bright, artificially perfect smiles against exotic backdrops, mocked me. It seemed impossible that this vibrant, travel blogger was destroying my life. I cycled between rage and a bitter curiosity, scrolling through photos and posts, searching for clues about their affair. It turned into a macabre fascination, her life becoming more vivid to me than my own. The changes in him were subtle. A new cologne, an interest in running, something he'd always scoffed at. Every flicker of departure from his normal patterns felt like a siren call, a neon sign pointing towards his guilt. Sometimes, I thought I imagined the shift. His eyes briefly focusing on nothing. A conversation abruptly cut off, was I reading too much into it? Had suspicion warped my every perception? Sarah worried I was losing it. "You'll drive yourself crazy," poring over his every move, she warned as we huddled at my kitchen table. But it was her presence that kept me somewhat sane. The need to present a semblance of normalcy made me get dressed, eat something, and walk the dog. The weight of knowing started to spread outwards. Casual get-togethers with old friends now buzzed with an undercurrent of suspicion. Did they know? Was their sympathy genuine, or thinly veiled pity? Each exchanged glance between them felt heavy with silent judgment. I wanted to scream. The silence was eating me alive. Should I hire a private investigator? The online ads felt sleazy, but a professional might find what I couldn't. Then there was the lawyer. A cold, pragmatic part of me craved the safety of knowing my options. But taking concrete steps made this nightmare impossible to deny. Was I ready to dismantle my life for the sake of revenge? The question lingered like an echo I couldn't escape. Late one night, brushing my teeth, I caught his gaze in the mirror. There was a question in his eyes, almost weary. Had he noticed my absences while he slept, those quiet moments hunched over his phone? My hand trembled, squeezing too much toothpaste onto the brush. Was this how it would end? A clumsy confrontation in a bathroom that once held easy intimacy? No, that wouldn't do. It was never going to be that simple. I spat out the foamy paste and held his gaze. I would make him beg for an ending this quick, this clean. My mind was a whirlwind, vengeance scenarios playing on an endless loop. Public humiliation was tempting. The image of his face crumbling at some work function, the whispers following him, brought a twisted pleasure. But that fleeting satisfaction didn't outweigh the fallout. Our children, our social standing, my own reputation, those would all shatter along with his. Then again, maybe that was the point. A cold, rational voice cut through the anger. Evidence. I needed irrefutable proof laid out with lawyer-like precision. Screenshots of their conversations, meticulously compiled. Those late-night work calls? I'd been recording snippets, his hushed voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone I'd never heard before. Evenings on the porch, hidden behind a book, became covert surveillance missions. The thought of confronting him made my skin crawl. But I found myself rehearsing it obsessively, imagining his excuses, his attempts to gaslight me, fueled a new kind of determination. Every line was practiced under my breath, in the shower, on solitary walks. How long do you think I'm an idiot? Look me in the eye and tell me it's nothing. Home had become a stage, a grotesque play I was forced to star in. Cooking him dinner, the clink of glasses as I poured his favorite wine, ignited a white-hot rage. Yet, my smile felt more genuine than it had in weeks. This performance wasn't just about fooling him, it was about convincing myself of my own resolve. Desperate for an upper hand, I started digging. He was meticulous about finances, but everyone has blind spots. Accessing his old work laptop under pretense of finding a document, I stumbled onto password-protected folders. Cracking them became my nightly obsession, the adrenaline eclipsing the fear of discovery. What about her? That perfect Instagram life surely had cracks in its foundation. Contacting her seemed insane, a move fueled by desperation. Yet, the idea held a twisted appeal. Was I looking for a sick camaraderie? To weaponize her pain? Or was this about proving women weren't passive players in his little game? For the first time in weeks, something approaching relief washed over me. The anger was still there, burning beneath the cold resolve. But it was no longer in control. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was plotting. Late one night, a painting I'd always hated caught my eye. A gift from his mother, an abstract mess that I'd always begrudgingly displayed. An idea, ridiculous and risky, sparked within me. It was exactly the kind of impulsive act the old me wouldn't have dreamed of. That old me was dead. He'd made sure of that. The painting, an ugly swirl of blues and reds, became the centerpiece of my plan. One well-timed accident. A splatter of coffee conveniently obscuring the part one despised most, and it would need to be replaced. Except, that wouldn't be the same painting coming back. My art student cousin and a few carefully applied brushstrokes would transform it into something wholly different, my secret weapon hidden in plain sight. Change became my mantra. Tiny shifts at first, barely noticeable to anyone but me. His favorite breakfast mug demoted to the back of the cupboard. His meticulously organized sock drawer rearranged. Even the radio station I always switched off as he pulled into the driveway was left blaring as I walked away. His initial bemusement was almost amusing. Did we get a poltergeist? He joked one morning, unable to find his running shoes. I played innocent, a touch too wide-eyed. Maybe you just misplaced them? I haven't touched your stuff. The seeds of doubt were planted. Had he become forgetful, or was his mind simply elsewhere? With each passing day, I ramped up the disruptions, a silent campaign designed to shatter his sense of normalcy. My allies were scrutinized. Sarah was my rock, but others, who might crack under pressure. A vague mention of stress during a lunch date, a carefully worded comment about men changing at work. I watched their reactions like a hawk, gauging who caught the underlying meaning and who remained blissfully unaware. My world had shrunk, everyone now a potential pawn in this twisted game. He'd always preyed on my insecurities. Now it was my turn. A casually dropped mention of a new gym routine, an offhand remark to Sarah about a haircut within his earshot, suddenly made him hyper-aware of my body, of changes he'd never noticed before. I'd never felt more powerful or more disgusted with myself. One evening, meticulously applying mascara, I debated taking it further. Feigned tears, a staged discovery, it wouldn't be hard to make him think I'd found more evidence. Watching him squirm would be intoxicating. But what then? That kind of overt performance held risks, and once I initiated that, there was no going back. Yet, inaction felt unbearable. The panic flared on sleepless nights, my whole life meticulously built, potentially crumbling into ash. Our kids? Would they turn on me, see me as the architect of their broken home? Could I rebuild financially? The questions swirled, a chorus of doubt in the quiet moments. But then, I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back. This woman, the one with defiance blazing in her eyes, she wasn't going to disappear. Not without a fight. A subtle shift in the air was impossible to ignore. His usual easygoing warmth had been replaced by something calculated, forced cheerfulness, lingering touches that set my teeth on edge. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. Then, a sickening realization dawned. What if he suspected? The thought chilled me. Was this an elaborate act, designed to lull me into a false sense of security? My analytical mind raced. Had I gotten sloppy? Deleted search histories were recoverable, hastily shut tabs could be retraced, every digital footprint held the potential to betray me. The hunter had become the hunted. My surveillance increased, now laced with a desperate need to cover my tracks. Browser histories were meticulously scrubbed, apps disguised, the paranoia gnawing at my own sense of reality. Even the innocent act of charging my phone near his side of the bed sent a jolt of terror through me. The performance intensified, I showered him with a suffocating faux affection, replaying the role of the happy wife to the point of nausea. Each forced laugh, every casual touch, chipped away at my soul. Yet, he seemed to lap it up, his concern mirroring my own performance. The mind games had begun, a grotesque dance, neither of us willing to make the first true misstep. Every interaction was loaded with hidden meaning. I overanalyzed his casual comments, searching for coded accusations. Did a playful tease about my phone usage hint at his knowledge? An offhand remark about a friend's messy divorce? Was it a thinly veiled threat? The line between real and imagined blurred with each passing day. The need to test him gnawed at me, leaving a folder marked "Important Documents" open on a shared computer seemed pathetically transparent, but I was desperate for a read on his suspicions. Did his eyes linger too long on the title? I watched him like a hawk, but found only his usual facade. Another, far more dangerous, plan simmered in the dark recesses of my mind. Decoys were carefully planted, an earring hidden in his car, lipstick on a collar that wasn't mine. Would he discover them, confront me? Or would his silence reveal that he'd already found far more damning evidence than I could plant? The psychological toll was immense. I'd fantasize about walking away, leaving a carefully crafted note filled with cold truths. But a stubbornness clawed at me. He wouldn't get away with turning our life into a plaything. He might think he was outsmarting me, but the game was far from over. My world tilted into an unsettling new reality. This wasn't just about his betrayal anymore, it was about survival. If he suspected what I knew, the game had changed. The narrative warped from scorned wife seeking vengeance to something far more sinister. A horrifying thought looped in my mind. Could I be the one painted as crazy? Him, the concerned husband dealing with an unhinged, delusional spouse? It was his word against mine, and the insidious way he'd undermined my confidence for years. Fear, a thick and cloying thing, settled in my chest. Sarah needed an update, but even with her, I had to be careful now. Had she mentioned anything to anyone, some comment that might get back to him? The circle of trust had shrunk to almost nothing. My previously carefree texts with friends now felt like a potential minefield. He could be watching them all, searching for any sign of my unraveling. A lawyer. That practical part of my brain screamed at me to go. Yet, that step was laden with danger. If he somehow found out, would it turn him aggressive? Would he preemptively move assets, cut off my escape routes? This wasn't a messy divorce, it was a meticulously strategized war, and I was woefully unprepared. Trying to anticipate his next move became an obsession. I replayed conversations, analyzed his offhand comments, searching for clues to his strategy. There was a history of manipulation, a talent for twisting situations to his advantage. Underestimating him was my greatest risk. A desperate thought struck me as I poured yet another glass of wine I had no intention of drinking. What if I was playing his game exactly as intended? Every overreaction, each sleepless night spent plotting, it all fed into the narrative he could potentially build. I needed to change course drastically. Feigned normalcy felt impossible, but what if I pushed it further, became a caricature of the oblivious wife? Baking his favorite cookies with a syrupy smile, asking innocuous questions about his day, it might just be crazy enough to work. The element of surprise was my only real advantage now. The house echoed with unsaid accusations. Breakfasts were tense, the clink of cutlery a discordant soundtrack to the silent war being waged. Each smile, every light touch, was a calculated performance designed to disarm. If he thought I was backing off, that my suspicions were unfounded, perhaps he would get sloppy, reveal his hand. And if I was catastrophically wrong, if this was all a twisted delusion in my head, well, then I really was broken beyond repair. The rage that had fueled me for so long was like a fire slowly guttering out. Confrontation, the explosive exposure, no longer held the appeal it once had. Those fantasies were born from pain, a desperate need to see him suffer the same hurt he'd inflicted. Now, a chilling clarity cut through the emotional haze. I wanted more than just a moment of satisfaction, I wanted everything. The transformation began subtly, he'd come to expect a disheveled wife, eyes haunted, anger simmering beneath the surface. I gave him the opposite, calm smiles, an easy laugh at his jokes, the picture of domestic tranquility. It was a performance worthy of an award, and the irony was not lost on me. This wasn't about escape, I wasn't going to disappear into the night, some vengeful ghost. No, this was about conquest. Every inch of this house, our social circle, the life we'd built, that was my battleground. And if he wanted to play games, I'd show him what a true player looked like. My keen eye for detail, previously focused on unraveling his lies, now turned into a weapon. Every vulnerability, every carefully concealed imperfection, became ammunition. His reliance on routine, that slight defensiveness when discussing his finances, even his thinly veiled vanity, all of it carefully catalogued to be exploited later. Shared acquaintances who'd witnessed the unraveling of normal were now treated to the spectacle of perfect. Yet, subtle dissonances were woven into the performance. Casual mentions of his long work hours, a raised eyebrow when another late-night drink was poured, skillfully planted seeds of doubt without a single explicit accusation. The cracks in his facade ran deep, a lingering sense of inadequacy that no amount of success could erase. Perhaps there was something to be exploited there? A harmless online poker game suggested at the poker night with his buddies, an expensive, limited edition watch casually mentioned. Temptations dangled, his path towards self-destruction paved with my carefully chosen suggestions. Each mistake in his professional life was its own sweet symphony. Misplaced paperwork I'd helpfully tucked away, accidentally, deleted emails, a whispered word to his assistant about his worsening forgetfulness. The decline was slow, insidious, and near impossible to trace back to me. He'd find his grip on things loosening, his once impeccable reputation ever so slightly tarnished. The deliciousness of it all was an intoxicating poison. I'd become someone I barely recognized, yet there was a perverse satisfaction in it, in this strength forged from the ashes of my old self. He'd underestimated me, mistook devastation for defeat. Now, the tables had ruthlessly turned. The game was afoot, and I would not just survive it, I would reign victorious. With each passing day, it became easier to keep up the charade. In fact, it was no longer a charade, it was my new reality. The chasm between his version of me and the woman I had become was almost comical. A perverse part of me reveled in his desperate attempts at connection, the thoughtful gifts left on the pillow, the attempts at playful banter that fell flat. The boundaries of the psychological battleground extended into the very home we shared. His favorite armchair was subtly moved, angled away from his usual TV-watching position. The familiar scent of a candle he loved, replaced with a fragrance he found headache-inducing. Even the artwork we'd carefully selected together was discreetly rearranged, subtle, easily dismissed as unimportant, yet a constant reminder that I was in control. The ghost of her became an unseen participant in our interactions. A casual mention of a trending news article about social media influencers, a compliment about a stranger's outfit similar to something I'd seen her wear, tiny verbal jabs, designed to reinsert her existence, and my knowledge of it, back into his carefully constructed world. Gaslighting him held a dark satisfaction. Distorting tiny details of conversations he clearly recalled, questioning appointments marked on his own calendar, it was a dangerous game, and one I was proving dangerously good at. Each flicker of confusion, each time he stumbled to backtrack, was a small but glorious victory. The financials became my obsession. Passwords were cracked with surprising ease, his tendency towards patterns made him predictable. Accounts he believed secret were siphoned, small amounts at first, enough to be dismissed as errors, not malice. My shopping sprees carried a new thrill. He paid for my revenge, unknowingly fueling his own demise. The changes in him were undeniable. Publicly, the mask still held firm, but hairline cracks were visible to my eyes. The confident stride was replaced by a slight hesitation, his easy laugh now tinged with a nervous edge. Rumors swirled, fueled by my strategically placed concerns about his distraction, his overwork. The whispers were a delightful chorus to my ears. He was unraveling, and I had the best seat in the house to watch the spectacle. People commented on my newfound glow, mistaking the ruthless determination in my eyes for a return to happiness. That misconception was fine by me. After all, in this twisted war one was waging, perception was my greatest weapon. Let them assume I was healing. The truth was far more chilling. I was transforming into something monstrously beautiful, born from the ashes of his betrayal. The question of when to finish him off lingered in my mind like a stubborn mosquito. Confrontation, with its explosive promise of immediate satisfaction, seemed crude now. There'd be no payoff in his desperate pleas, his attempts to blame me for his fall from grace. I wanted more than his misery, I wanted his oblivion. The idea was born on an ordinary weekday morning. Sipping tea in the sunroom, I watched him meticulously straighten his tie in the hallway mirror. A flash of clarity so simple, yet undeniably perfect. An elaborate frame-up was unnecessary, the tools for his destruction were nestled within his own carefully constructed world. His company was built on his reputation, a complex web of investors and partnerships. A whiff of financial impropriety, cleverly orchestrated rumors seeded online, an anonymous tip-off to the board regarding a mishandled deal, the dominoes set carefully in place. It wouldn't take much to send it all tumbling down. Yet, even that seemed too kind. A quick downfall? A scandal whispered about in boardrooms and on the golf course? No, I wanted him drowning slowly, savoring every gasping breath. He'd taken my world apart piece by piece. I'd mirror his destruction. The option that made my blood sing with a terrible anticipation was unthinkable. Staying. Not as his wife, something monstrous had replaced that naive woman, but as a constant reminder of his failure. He wanted ownership of his life? Fine, I would become the unsaleable property haunting his perfectly manicured existence. The first blow wouldn't come from me. His company's internal audit one I'd subtly pushed for months ago by playing on his paranoia, would reveal the initial cracks, discrepancies I'd painstakingly created. His frantic attempts to mend the damage would be met with yet more obstacles, unforeseen delays, like a series of perfectly timed, unfortunate accidents. Pen_spark. Each defeat would chip away at the image he desperately clung to. I'd be there, witness to his unraveling, the concerned, yet secretly gleeful, bystander offering now ineffectual support. The people he spent years impressing would witness his decline, my presence at his side a constant question mark. This wouldn't end in an explosion, but a whimper. A penniless, broken man, with me, the ghost of the life he destroyed, ever present. And when the time was right, perhaps years in the future, then I would finally walk away. I imagined the look on his face, the realization of his true, inescapable loss. The thought of it brought a smile to my lips, one no one could decipher. I was no longer solely playing the game, I'd become the architect of its rules. And his ending, bleak, lonely, stripped of everything, would be my final, twisted masterpiece. Let's see him try to recover.